This episode of the Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. You know, people always look at me weird when I say I start off every morning with a big old martini. But then I set them straight, and I tell them I'm talking about Martini Coffee Roasters coffee. A delicious coffee made by the Martini family. They roast their coffee using a traditional method of sight and sound to roast those little babies to perfection. And they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. And right now, fans of the Creep Street Podcast can get 20% off their entire order by using the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Once again, for 20% off your order, use the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Martini Coffee Roasters, the perfect coffee to keep you creeps caffeinated.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
This is Maureen Bogey.
And you have arrived at the Creep Street Podcast.
That's right.
All right. Of course, real quick up top, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter at Creep Street Pod. We're also on TikTok. On our Facebook, we also have a little forum where daily we interact with our listeners. It's forum that everyone's welcome to join. It's called Citizens of the Milky Way, a Creep Street fan page. Find it on Facebook. Just click the Let Me In button. One of us will let you in. And of course, if once a week is not enough.
And I don't mean to be like saying I know what's exactly right for your life and seem like I am some kind of expert.
Oh, sounds like the doctor is in.
But I medically know that you need to be subscribed. You need to be a patron, okay?
Absolutely.
For your health.
Yes.
You need this.
It is a matter of life and death.
Yeah. So just for your own self, for your own sake, for your own safety, become a patron.
Please do. Now, what is that? Do you hear that?
I don't know. What do you hear?
Are those sleigh bells in the air?
Oh, come on.
Is that the smell of holly and ivy I smell? Is that a mistletoe dangling above us?
Oh, God.
Maureen, we are in the thick of the holiday season.
I mean, thick of it.
Thick into it.
Yeah. And happy to be here. You know what I mean? What a fun time of year. It's always so fun to go from the Halloween season into the Christmas season.
Absolutely.
Because, they're different vibes, but there is some overlap still. And it's a fun time of year.
Absolutely. And of course, we say this every year. It's a bit cliche, but we'll say it again.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if you celebrate Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Ramadan, or if you celebrate all of it or none of it. We are happy to have you here on Creep Street.
That's right. You are welcome. We're happy to have you.
Absolutely. Now, last week, we gave them a little spanking. We gave them a weird little paranormal UFO spanking.
Yeah, that I would consider it a spanking.
We really stuffed their stockings with care. Mm-hmm. And we gave them a pretty bizarre episode.
Yeah.
Now, Maureen, I'm excited because this was one we were going to do last December, and then it kind of slipped by us, and then in January I was like, oh, wait, we should have done this.
Yeah.
So here it is, a year on, and now finally we get to unleash this upon the world. Maureen, what are we talking about today?
Today we're talking about something that I'm sure you have heard a thing or two about.
Okay.
We're talking about something that is beautiful. We're talking about something that is scary. We're talking about something that is small. We're talking about something that is big. I mean, we're talking about all kinds of stuff, but still one thing.
Okay.
Do you have a guess about what it is?
The size of Jude Law's beard.
Oh my God.
Sometimes it's big, sometimes it's small, sometimes it's not there.
That's so true. I would like to do an episode on that, and maybe we will. I'm not saying we're not gonna do it, okay? 2023 is a new year. Anything could happen.
Absolutely.
Today, we are talking about the magical, magnificent beings known as elves.
Ooh, I feel the chill of the winter solstice upon us.
That's right. It's almost here, and we're diving deep, and I mean deep, into elf territory.
That's
today.
right, baby. This is something that's been on our radar for a while, and I'm so happy we are stuffing this turkey tonight.
Now, let me just list off some of my sources here. I had a lot of fantastic, fun, informative sources this week. Now, I have a few articles. One is Elves at euclidpubliclibrary.com. Elf on a Shelf, The Strange History of Santa's Little Helper by Stephanie Pappas at livescience.com. The Wonders of Santa Claus via the Smithsonian Libraries. Mysterious Elves of Iceland in the World's Only Elf School by Brent Swanser at Mysterious Universe. Then we have a few YouTube videos that were very helpful. One is Elves, The Mythical History of European Folklore by Legends of History. Another is The Origins and History of Elves by Mythical Factory. Elves, From Norse Myth to Santa's Workshop by Mythology Unleashed. And then we have The Legends of Santa by Real Stories.
We are about to dive into a wintry fairyland.
We really are. And it's funny you mentioned fairies, Dylan, okay?
Okay.
Because that's, I think, a good place to start, is just by kind of talking about these different things.
Please.
We got fairies, we got gnomes, we've got elves, we've got hobgoblins.
Oh my gosh.
We've got nymphs, sprites. So we've got lots of different kinds of beings or entities that are kind of similar to each other, very different from each other in some ways, but also have a lot of crossover in what they are.
Amen. We learned a bit of that when we covered gnomes last month.
That's right. Correct. Now, some people think that elves are kind of a kind of fairy, or that they were at one point a kind of fairy and kind of came from that way. But also some people say that they are completely their own separate entities.
Okay, interesting.
Because sometimes elves are seen as being, only a few inches tall to a few feet tall, up to full-grown human size.
Right,
And
yes.
anywhere and everywhere in between. So that's just something that I think is super interesting about elves, is that how different they can be depending on where you are and when you are.
Correct.
Because it really kind of changes what they are, what they look like, what they do, what their intentions are, okay? And this topic, even though elves are like one of the most recognizable and most beloved entities or beings from either the other side or from fantasy or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
There is still not like a ton of concrete, really easy to understand kind of background of them. Because they overlap so much, and the time and kind of how they think of elves changes depending on when you're looking at certain texts and stuff like that. So it can be a little confusing.
Yeah.
So we're definitely piecing together a bunch of things here today, but I think we've got a good comprehensive view about these little freaks. And we will eventually do a fairies episode in its own right. We're not really going to talk about fairies today because, in my opinion, they're kind of different things.
Yeah.
And so we will get to fairies at another time.
Yeah.
But elves, or the word elf, comes from the Anglo-Saxon word elf. And that word elf, apparently, if that's how you even say it, just the soft A in front of the E, originally comes from the word, I think you call it elfidil, which meant nightmare or nightmares.
Wow, okay.
Because this will come up as we're talking about it, but there are a few instances and places and times where nightmares are thought to be caused by elves.
Oh, wow.
By sitting on your chest while you're sleeping, very similar to sleep paralysis.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's things we've covered in many forms, like the hag or the, sitting on your chest, or the shadow man, or the hat man, or, things like that. Yeah. It never doesn't surprise me when there's connections like this.
Yeah.
Even though almost every episode we're like, oh, there's a connection. I never don't get excited when I see one.
Yeah, they're cool. It's cool. And in Old High German, the word for elf was alp, or alpi for elves. Now, in Old English communities, some people had elf-like names, like Elfwine, which means elf friend, or Elfweird, which means elf guardian. And the name Alfred used to be Alfred, which meant elf advice. So people had enough regard, or high enough regard, for elves to want to name their children after them.
So Alfred, it comes from that of elf advice. Oh, which it just makes it so perfect that Alfred Pennyworth is Bruce Wayne's butler, or not his butler, more than that, not his sidekick, because I guess you'd call it Robin. But yeah, he's kind of like, he often goes to Alfred for advice, or Alfred often advises him.
Yeah.
You know.
That is interesting. Now, elves can be seen kind of in their own different kinds of ways all over the world, but the main ways that we kind of think of elves today and what has shaped elves today are rooted in Germanic, Norse, and British mythology. And something that's interesting about this is that the belief in elves existed pre-Christianity and post-Christianity being introduced to Europe.
Okay.
So they kind of changed a little bit as that happened. But the belief or the notion of elves has been around for so damn long.
Right, absolutely.
Now, one of the bad boys, if I do say so myself, that really kind of made elves what we think of them today, I gotta give it up for Norse mythology.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
You know, they had the word Alfir, or Alfir, I think it's pronounced Alfir for elf, and Alfar for elves, and they had light elves, or Leoselfar, and they lived in the heavens, and they were, like, radiantly beautiful.
All right.
Yes.
Hubba hubba.
Hubba hubba indeed. They dwelled in a place called Alfheim, and these light elves were kind and benevolent towards human beings. But then there were the dark elves, or the Dokelfar, and they were said to live in Sarfelheim, which apparently translates directly to Homeland of the Black Elves, apparently.
Oh, okay.
And the Black Elves had a little bit more of a malicious attitude to them, okay?
Okay, a little bit of the two.
A little bit of the toot, a rude dude with a crude attitude.
Okay, my kind of guy.
Yeah, I didn't make that up. Just want to put that out there. I just like it. Like that phrase. Now, these dark elves, they could create magical objects and weapons, but they lived underground because if they were caught in the sunlight, they would turn to stone.
Ooh, okay.
Kind of a little bit of a vampire vibe there.
Right, and if not vampire, like there's other things that it's kind of a trope we see in a lot of things, whether it's elves or like, for example, the Sanderson sisters. If they got caught in the sunlight, they turned to stone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the turning to stone thing is, it's been a trope that's been around since the beginning, really.
Right. And how interesting is it, too, that they have, like, two versions of these elves? One more kind of celestial and ethereal, kind of, in a way.
Yeah.
And being more of the heavens. And then they have one that's more of a subterranean situation.
Right, of the earth.
Of the earth. And that they are more of the negative, malicious lot. We just see that a lot with paranormal activity in general, but also just with like storytelling and things like that over and over again, where it's like, we got a lot of stuff going on underground, whether that is, hollow earth theory, what have you.
Yeah.
And then there's people living above us.
Right. Or just things associated with the elements, the fire, water, earth, air,
So elves are connected with earth as well.
Yeah.
They're kind of thought to be woodland or hills-based homies.
Yeah.
If you will. And going back to these dark elves, or these black elves, they could infiltrate dreams and were responsible for nightmares. Kind of like how I mentioned before, elves being responsible for people having nightmares, and the word elf coming from the word meaning nightmare. Pretty crazy. Now, in English mythology, or British mythology, I should really say, elves were also kind of seen a little bit differently than the Norse saw elves. They also saw them to be magical, but they were more innocent, beautiful creatures. They didn't have like the black elf counterpart.
Okay, very interesting.
And this was just at the early times of elves, because as times went on, some people did have some negative thoughts towards elves, but some people had positive thoughts towards elves. It really changes a lot, and that's why this is so confusing, because it's all about your perspective, baby.
Absolutely.
And people's minds change, and they're allowed to change, okay?
Absolutely.
But it does make it harder for research. But in British mythology or Anglo-Saxon mythology, there is the thought of Elfane or Elfland. This is like what it sounds like, the land of the elves.
Ah, okay.
And there is an old ballad about Thomas the Rhymer that said that the Elf Queen invited him back to Elfland, and she brought him back there for 7 years. And when she finally brought him back to the mortal realm, she gifted him with the ability to prophesize. So this kind of goes along with the idea that elves were kind of these like beautiful, kind of tempestuous beings in some regards, and that they had an elf queen.
Oh, okay.
But elves weren't only seen in that regard. They also were seen as kind of related to the devil or witchcraft, or mainly the devil or witchcraft.
Oh, okay.
And in the early 1500s, elves and the elf queen would come up again during witch trials. And apparently it was said that the elf queen would ride a white horse through the forest.
Okay. Interesting.
Now, however, sometimes they were thought to be small, mischievous beings similar to goblins. So a lot of what we've talked about so far has been them kind of like human size, but sometimes they're thought to be much smaller, just like a few feet tall or like just a few inches tall sometimes even.
Right, yes.
And these elves weren't malicious by any means, or they weren't evil by any means, but they liked to annoy humans on purpose, and they were responsible for misplacing things. Doesn't that sound like a poltergeist?
It does. And doesn't it just sound so interesting that, with some exceptions, a lot of these, when we're talking about, even though they do overlap a lot with ghosts and stuff, but we're talking about these actual creatures, like whether it's gnomes, fairies, elves, or leprechauns. When we've talked about leprechauns, a common theme I've seen is that you never know what you're going to get.
Never.
Like a demon, you always know what you're going to get.
Right.
You know what I mean? It might surprise you in how it does it, but you know it's bad. Like, it sounds like with these things, you never quite know.
Exactly.
Because sometimes they can even fuck your life up, even if they're not even mad at you, they're just having a good time.
Right. They kind of live in that in-between. That
yes.
kind of, in which we talk about all the time, where they're neither good nor bad, except for the light elves and the dark elves or the black elves. That is the opposite of that. But in other places, they do kind of live in this in-between.
Exactly.
So elves were regarded in all sorts of different ways. You know, they could be positive, negative, they could be neutral, they could be literally demons, they could be beautiful creatures that humans could reproduce with, kind of all over the map.
Right.
And this really stayed the same pre and post Christianity coming in. But Christianity did want to take out the worshiping isn't really necessarily the right word per se, but the reverence of elves.
Right.
In some different ways when Christianity was coming through, because a lot of people still did believe in elves, but they were just maybe seen to be more uglier and scarier.
Right, yes.
But I believe in Norse mythology, though, elves, pre-Christianity, elves kind of they weren't deities per se, but like they were godlike in their nature and how magical they were. So it kind of makes sense that people were kind of like worshiping them, and the Catholic Church wanted to kind of knock that down a peg.
Interesting.
But people just like believed in elves back then.
Yeah.
It was just a common belief back then to believe in some kind of elves.
Right.
You know, maybe you didn't encounter them all the time, like it seemed like maybe people in 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago did, but people were still having encounters with elves and were saying they were seeing elves or believed that things were happening because of elves. And, people had kind of a right to really believe in elves. And back in, like medieval times and, all of these things, because there was so much that was completely undiscovered and understood or misunderstood that it makes sense that you want to come up with a reason for something for it happening. So it only makes sense that you come up with a reason, you put a face to the name or a face to the sensation or the face to the experience.
Right.
All of this, it makes sense why they do this, especially because some scary things were happening, back in the day. I mean, all the days, but especially back in the ding dong day.
Yeah.
Because, there were mysterious illnesses that could really affect you or your livestock or your crop. And it was thought in Scandinavia as well as Great Britain that elves could cause people and livestock to become sick.
Oh, yeah.
And cause illnesses. And people thought they were really even finding evidence of this as well. So it makes sense even more that people were believing in it. They thought that elves would cause illnesses to people and to livestock through projectiles. So like a bow and arrow, kind of.
Right.
And that would cause the illness to take hold. And that was called elf shot.
Yeah, we've talked about this. I think even in the gnomes episode, there was like a gnome version of that.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
Elf shot. I'm almost certain elf shot has come up in past episodes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right.
And people would find ancient arrowheads in the ground from, way before, and they didn't know what they were, and they thought they were arrowheads from elves. They thought that was the elf shot.
Oh.
So it kind of makes sense. And also people believed that elves, especially at this time, could be invisible. So that's why you didn't see them. They were either living in our plane, but they were invisible, or they were living kind of like in another, like a Middle Earth, I guess. Like,
right.
In another plane, an in-between land, or Elfir, or Elfland, or whatever. And that's why you couldn't see them all the time.
Right.
Or you didn't know when they were attacking you or causing you nightmares or illnesses or what have you. Now, one of my sources said that people would use either crosses or pentagrams to guard themselves from elves. But I don't want to say that is definitely true, because I'm a little confused by that, because I don't know if the cross was done before Christianity came in and it's just a coincidence, or if the cross was used after Christianity came in and as just a general way to protect yourself. I'm not sure. So that one, it's just an interesting tidbit I wanted to add. Take it as you will. But I don't know if that was pre or post Christianity coming in.
Right.
But either way, I think it's interesting. Now, in Sweden, elves were seen of a little bit differently than some other places. They lived in the hills rather than within the woods, as most stories kind of describe elves. And they were all female and governed by an elf king, which is kind of different. Usually we would hear of an elf queen, but here there was just one elf king. You could usually see these elves in the late night or early morning, kind of like the in-between time. And they would leave footprints in the grass, and it was said that if you peed into these footprints, it would cure you of STDs.
Really?
Yes.
If you found elven footprints. Wow.
And apparently you weren't supposed to walk on them. I don't know why peeing on them is not is respectful, but walking on them is not respectful. I don't know. But
I know. Must have been a different time.
A different time. But whatever works, whatever gets rid of that twingle in your dingle.
Yeah.
There were also Danish ballads about real people and supernatural entities, but especially elves getting it on.
Whoa, okay.
And in northern England and Scotland, people held on to the belief of elves much longer than kind of other people throughout the similar area.
Okay.
By the time the Middle Ages came around, people weren't really believing them to be deities anymore, elves, but they were still considered magical. But as the years went on, more and more people started to think of them as more so just aspects of folklore and fiction and literature and things like that. But some people still really held on to the belief, and two of those places are northern England and Scotland.
Wow.
And they held on to this belief for a long time, and they believed that elves lived among humans. Like they were able to disguise themselves, maybe cover up the ears and whatnot.
Yes, and that's something you hear about quite a bit. I think it's quite common in Iceland still.
Yes, when we're going to talk about Iceland.
Yes, because Iceland is, and I won't spoil it, but Iceland is a wonderful place where a lot of that is still very vibrant. A lot of that culture and stuff is still very vibrant and still very much a part of everyday life.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, people were believing then, and kind of like how Dylan said now, elves, some people in Iceland believe now still too, is that they're either living among us or they're hidden very, very deeply somewhere.
Right.
And elves also just became so popular and thought of in so many specific different ways, a lot of it because of literature. For example, Puck in A Midsummer Night's Dream. He's impish, he's mischievous, but he's good-humored. And he is an elf. And this was in the Elizabethan time-ish, I
Right.
believe. I could be wrong there.
The
Don't quote
Renaissance.
me.
Oh, yeah. Early Renaissance. Yeah. So the early modern ages. Yeah.
So at this time, that kind of moved people away from thinking elves were these, like gorgeous, godlike beings and seeing them as more impish and silly.
Okay.
There were also stories from Jacob Grimm, from Hans Christian Andersen, and of course from J.R.R. Tolkien.
Yes.
Now, Tolkien kind of took his inspiration, it seems like to me, a lot from the Norse and Germanic kind of vibes going on. Because, they're like kind of godlike. They don't age past a certain point. They're beautiful. They're the whole total package.
Yeah.
Do I think I look like a little bit like Legolas when I put my hair in a half ponytail? The answer is yes, I do. And I don't mean it in a positive way. I think I look like Orlando Bloom, and I think that works for Orlando Bloom. But does it work for me? I don't think it does. But I do still wear my hair up in a half ponytail.
I don't mind it.
Pop off king. Now, I'm not an expert at all on Tolkien. I gotta be honest with you, I've never read Lord of the Rings. I've read The Hobbit, was a fan, but I can't sit here and tell you like I know everything about Lord of the Rings style elves. But what I do know is that they seem cool.
All right.
And that is one of the aspects of elves, or one of the portrayals of elves that really kind of ring true for us in our society today, as far as us seeing elves, or what we think elves to be. There are still a few different types of elves that we think of, but the Tolkien style elf really has taken off. I think we can all agree.
Absolutely.
But in Iceland, they have their own version of elves that are different than the godlike creatures of Tolkien. But as Dylan said before, they are quite popular.
Yes.
Now, apparently the elves of Iceland, they've got an agenda, baby.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. They are out here trying to maintain the natural and rural landscape of Iceland.
Yes.
Now, there was a study done that estimated that around 62% of Icelanders believe in the existence of elves, and a substantial portion of others have an open mind to the possibility.
Yeah. Which I think is so cool.
I think it's so cool too. I think it's awesome. And these elves are a little bit different. They're more of the small elf, like small variety, just like from a couple feet tall to a few inches tall type. And they are said to live in these elf stones, these like stacks of stones.
Right.
That I don't know if people make them, or if elves make them, or if it's a little bit of both. I don't know.
And I think they like to, apparently, some of them live around the volcanic rocks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And moving these stones is said to bring on just a bunch of bullshit and possibly even death. And it's not just like people are wanting to honor the memory of the culture.
Right.
It's like people genuinely are believing that elves live in there.
Right.
And they think it's just the right thing to do, to just let the elves do their damn thing.
Yeah.
The hidden folk are what they're called.
Yes, the hidden folk.
It's like Holdufolk or something like that.
Yeah.
But it translates to hidden folk. There is a historian named Magnus Skarfeoninsson. That's definitely not how you say it. That one
Right.
I can guarantee I said wrong, but I literally have no idea, and I do apologize. But the first name is Magnus, and this historian is widely considered to be one of the foremost experts on Icelandic elves and their lore. And not only is he thought to be one of the foremost experts, he actually runs the world's first full-fledged elf school, or an Alfaskólan, and it is an offshoot of the Paranormal Foundation of Iceland.
Wow. That sounds so familiar. I think in one of our very first Patreon bonus episodes from like a few years ago, we might have talked about this.
Oh, really? I can't
sounds-
remember. We probably did.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. It's so cool. I would love to go to this place
Absolutely.
and check it out. Because Magnus takes all of the reports very, very seriously. And this is a quote from Magnus himself. People come to me with their stories and they swear to me they're not drunk. They're not on drugs. They're not a pathological liar. I never planned to create the elf school. As more and more people inquired about my work, I just started telling everyone to come by on Fridays, and that's how it all began. I think that's so fun.
Yeah.
And according to Magnus, there are 13 different species of elves living in Iceland. Some just a few inches high to some a few feet high. Some of them very friendly and open and warm and welcoming, and some very shy or even malicious.
Okay.
And this is another quote from Magnus. We don't have a clue why these creatures are pulled back and forth between dimensions. The only thing you can do is collect all people's experiences. The only source of information is to find all possible witnesses and ask them in detail. What do they look like? What are they wearing? What is their opinion on God and eternity? Why are they here? There are many things we still don't know about elves and hidden people. What we do know, we have learned from people who have decades of friendships with them and have been invited into their homes. And there's another woman, a student at the elf school named Anna Sue, and she has a very interesting take on the whole phenomenon. She says, the truth is, most people are so conditioned and regimented in their lives that they lose any connection to the greater forces at work. Once we disconnect from magic, we disconnect from grace and the divine. As a result, similar to a flower cut from its roots, our spiritual life force weakens as we lose our connection to nature and the flow of life. We become anxiety-ridden and blind to the complex ecosystem that surrounds and supports us.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, I think that is very interesting. And it kind of makes sense that the belief in elves kind of still is going strong, or at least somewhat strong, in Iceland, because Iceland is so unique and so its own place and has its own culture.
Absolutely.
It's pretty isolated.
Yeah, and it's not a very populated place either.
Right, yeah. It's fascinating. And the idea of elves came from all the way when Norse Vikings were checking it out back in the 10th century, I think.
Yeah.
So the belief in elves has been there for years and years and years and years, and it's still going strong. And we need to go to Iceland one day.
Yes.
I mean, Dylan and I got married in 2020.
Yes.
So we did a small little honeymoon thing. We drove to New England, and it was amazing.
This was right during the peak of the pandemic and everything, because we wanted to go to Iceland.
Yes.
We were deciding between Iceland or
Africa.
South
Africa / Kenya.
Yeah.
We were deciding between those, and it didn't end up happening. So we're gonna go. We'll take you with us, Creep Street.
Absolutely.
Now, I think some people might have a question for me.
Okay.
They're thinking, Maureen, Victoria, Bogey, it is December, okay? You're talking about elves, and you haven't as so much as even mentioned Christmas elves.
Okay.
Now, don't you worry your pretty little head. I was saving it for last because I think it's cute.
Let's hear it.
So let me tell you, figuring this out and finding multiple sources to confirm this took me a long time.
It did.
Because Christmas elves, it's so ingrained in us now in 2022 that Christmas elves are a thing.
Yeah.
So, but you're okay, so where did it come from? It seems like they just were always with Santa Claus. It seems like they were always a part of the Christmas tradition.
Right.
When really that's not the case. They did come from a certain place. And they do have some roots in European folklore. They do have some roots in Grylos and the Yule Lads.
Yes.
There's one. Now, up north, there is another kind of guy that influenced elves. It goes by a bunch of different names depending on where you are, whether you are in Iceland or Norway or Switzerland or even some parts of Germany. I think.
Okay.
Denmark, called the Tomte or Tomten, is what it's very commonly known as.
Interesting. All right.
And it's basically just this gnome elf little guy that wears a red pointy hat and is always kind of associated with winter solstice / Christmas. And they originally didn't have anything to do with Christmas per se, or elves in Christmas elf wise, but they have just kind of been associated with Christmas because basically they are just these bearded elf guys that just kind of help out around the house and the farm.
Very interesting.
They're just these cute little helpers.
Yeah.
Which we love that. I think that's cute. But much of Santa as we know him today, as well as Christmas elves as we know them today, really come from America.
Okay.
inspired and definitely, have some inspiration coming from Europe and a few different places, but especially America. Now, Santa Claus himself, the man with the sack.
Whoa.
Okay? He himself was originally called an elf in the "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" poem, which is actually called A Visit from St. Nick, or A Visit by St. Nick, by Clement Clarke Moore. And it was written in 1882. In the famous poem itself, it says, "When what to my wandering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer, with a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be Saint Nick. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry, his cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard of his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of his pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf. I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself."
Well, well, well.
So Santa himself, right off the bat, was an elf. They were kind of playing off the jovial, childlike, even though bearded and an old man, but kind of this impish, very friendly version of an elf here in this poem.
Absolutely.
But then there was an illustrator who was very popular and very, very influential on what we now think of as Santa Claus. He was an illustrator named Thomas Nast, and he changed Santa Claus to be from a tiny elf man into a full-grown man.
Oh.
But since people had already, elf had gotten in the minds of people in association with Santa Claus, other writers kind of took note. In 1857, in Harper's Weekly, they published a poem called The Wonders of Santa Claus, and says that Santa, quote, "keeps a many elves at work, all working with all their might, to make a million of pretty things, cakes, sugar plums, and toys, to fill the stockings hung up, by the little girls and boys." So it was 1857 that first time we really heard that Santa had these little elf helpers.
Okay, all right.
And other illustrators kind of made that popular and made it stick in everyone's minds. But one image especially did, and that was in 1922, Norman Rockwell released a painting of an exhausted Santa Claus surrounded by tiny, industrious elves.
Okay.
And since then, in terms of Christmas, elves, it's just been, the rest is history in terms of elves. Like, there's so much different lore in terms of elves, like what they look like, what they really do specifically, but overall, they are all helpers of Santa Claus. And are they old men? Are they children? Are they adults? Just normal, your run-of-the-mill adult, but just small?
Right.
It's not sure. And now the elf tradition is even moving forward, with the movie Elf with Will Ferrell that came out that was super popular, still is super popular. And then we also have the Elf on the Shelf.
That's right.
Which is crazy popular these days, at least in America. It is in the States. It is like every family with kids has an elf on the shelf.
Right.
You name your elf. It's a magical elf. It can't talk to you. I mean, what's not to like?
Absolutely.
So what I love about elves and what makes elves a little confusing is that they can be so many different things.
Truly.
But what we do know about elves is that they are magical beings that are able to do things and understand things that humans cannot do or understand. They have been around for thousands of years, and I don't think elves are going anywhere.
I don't think so. Well, Maureen, thank you so much for all of that incredible research.
Of course, it is my pleasure. If you guys have any other thoughts or ideas or questions or comments or anything about elves, please feel free to reach out to us on any of our socials, or you can email us at creepstreetpodcast@gmail.com.
Well, I've got a list of names of magical beings that I care so much about.
Okay.
Folks, the names of our top-tier Patreon subscribers, of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish Face Fiat Lundqvist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Vivacious Vicky McHugh, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the Oh-So Suave Sean Richardson, the British Bone Breaker Bex Martin, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Fire Starter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, the Sir of Sexy Sam Hackworth, the Evil Elizabeth Riley, Lauren Hellfire Hernandez Lopez, the Maniacal Laura Maynard, the Vicious Karen Van Buren, the Arch Nemesis Aaron Bird, the Sadistic Sergio Castillo, the Rapscallion Ryan Crum, the Beast Benjamin Huang, the Devilish Chris Doucette, the Psycho Sam, the Electric Emily Zhang, the Ghoulish Gert Hankum, the Renegade Corey Ramos, the Crazed Carlos, and the antagonist Andrew Parr.
Whoa. Thank you so much to all of our top-tier Patreon subscribers. What a great Christmas gift you are to us today and all days. Thank you to all of our Patreon subscribers and to all of you for listening. We couldn't do this without you, and we are so happy to have you on board.
That's right. Of course, tell your friends, your family, your loved ones, evangelize the good name of Creep Street. Hit us with 5 stars or a thumbs up on whatever outlet you listen to us on.
That's right. And please remember to send in to us your personal stories.
Yes.
These can be your encounters with the paranormal, your small town true crime, your connection with urban legend. It can be anything, but we want to hear about it.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
Good night and goodbye.
Goodbye.